First of all, welcome to yet another PTC Talks, where we are honored today by having Anders Lindberg, who is the Nordic Sustainability Lead at Ernst & Young, for a session on how to harness data and IT to drive sustainability transformation. But first, a very quick introduction about myself. My name is Torbjörn Pilsson, and I'm the Alliance Manager for PTC in the Nordics, and we are running all these webinars on Fridays every week, same time. We also invite customers and partners for some inspiration on digital transformation, see what is possible and how to make things happen. And all the past webinars have also been recorded and are to be found on the registration site. And the agenda for today is first a very quick overview of PTC by myself, and then Anders will run the show by introducing himself and touch base on a few challenges, how to address these, and then explain some of the business outcomes. And at the end, we are also having a Q&A session, so please keep your questions to the end. Or you also actually may put them in the chat and we will pick them up later. So now, next slide here, Linda. Yeah. So a little bit quick overview of PTC. PTC is a global software company with a headquarters in Boston, and we are providing leading software solutions on IoT, AR, PLM, SLM, ALM, and CAD through the digital thread, so to help companies to accelerate the digital transformation. Now over to you, Anders.
Yes, thank you for that. So, yeah, thank you for having me. The title of today's presentation then is How to Harness Data and IT to Drive Sustainable Transformation. If we move over to next slide, I have this humble picture of myself. If we can stay on that introduction slide, Linda. Yeah. So why am I here? Torbjörn, thank you very much for inviting me. We had the opportunity to have a common seminar with Chalmers a while back, and I will do a similar presentation here. My role is, as you said, Torbjörn, I have a role as a Nordic sustainability client executive within EY in the Nordics. So what will I talk about then? I will share some perspectives on what we believe needs to be in focus to have a real impact when you talk about decarbonization and how you can use data and IT to enable that. There was also, when you talk about data and IT, I think it's also important to reflect on, the effectiveness of the whole kind of corporate sustainability function or capability that you have around in the companies and organizations today. And this presentation is a bit inspired by a really strong report that my Australian colleagues developed last year called the Enough Report. And it's a pretty extensive report where they actually question a little bit the effectiveness of corporate sustainability the last 20 years. And I think it's enough for all of us to actually look on, the global emission numbers and the emission numbers for companies and organizations that they haven't yet started to move actually in the right direction. So there is something we need to do differently. And I think we can draw a parallel to, ESG, IT, and the software landscape and the approaches that we have had for the last 20 years. There is a similar pattern there, I think. So I will actually start by taking a step back instead of diving directly into the data and IT space and share some perspectives. And this is also, I think, something that I miss sometimes when you attend various sustainability seminars, that I sometimes miss the holistic picture, and I think it's important to step back. So if we can move to the next slide. I'm not sure how familiar you are with these definitions. Torbjörn, can we expect people to be familiar with these definitions, or should I just present them quickly?
You could do that very quickly, I think.
Yeah. So this is quite important for the rest of the presentation, because we will talk a lot about decarbonization and the climate topic. Of course, sustainability is much broader. But when we talk about decarbonization, it's quite important to understand, have a at least high-level understanding of these Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 1 emissions are typically called direct emissions from the company's own activities, such as own company cars and so on. Scope 2 emissions could be summarized as the emissions that comes from purchased energy, you could actually say. So this is typically a pretty large chunk of the own emissions. So Scope 1 and Scope 2 are typically called the company's and organization's own emissions. But then we have an interesting animal to the right here, the Scope 3 emissions. And this is actually where some of the key points is for this presentation. There we typically talk about upstream emissions from all the suppliers and raw materials that get into your company, and downstream emissions, where you typically have a large chunk of emissions from the use of the products that we sell to our customers. So this is more in the customer phase and the use phase of the products and end of life phase. So if we move on to the next slide. So this is to the left here, you see an emissions profile of a world-leading Nordic manufacturing company in selling transportation vehicle, you could say. And this is just one example of what the breakdowns may look like when you look into manufacturing companies. So what you see here is that you have Scope 1 emissions in blue, Scope 2 emissions in green, and in light yellow, you have these upstream emissions from suppliers. And in the dark yellow, you have downstream emissions, primarily from the use phase here. And what I think is quite remarkable is, sorry, there is some sound in the background. Maybe it's possible to.
Thank you.
So what is quite remarkable here is that that the Scope 1 and 2 emissions are really decimals here. So what is quite remarkable is that the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, this is not only for this manufacturing company, but if you look at also other companies, it's very small. And in this case, it's like 0.14% for 2021 for this company. And if you combine that fact with that focus within corporate sustainability and the software supporting this corporate sustainability capability over the last 20 years have focused on Scope 1 and 2, you can, I mean, answer yourself, what impact do you expect to get out of that? So I think this is a real key point here to say that Scope 3 is so important. It has not actually been reported on by all companies until now, and there are companies that go out and kind of praise themselves for the strong climate performance and decarbonization performance while only reporting Scope 1 and 2. And you can see that that may be a bit questionable. Another fact to add to this is we did a survey last year with 200 major companies in the Nordics, where we saw that only 8% of the companies have reduction plans for Scope 3. And this fact goes a bit hand in hand with the survey we did in the UK, where we had 5% of the companies with kind of credible transition plans towards their sustainability goals. And many companies that we see, they have, which is very positive, they have established science-based targets, which typically mean that you need to halve emissions until 2030 and become net zero until 2040-50. So I think this is a little bit the context that we have to deal with. So if we move to the next slide, looking, I mean, a bit on the business benefits and what you could typically gain from actually taking more advanced steps and more action in this area. There are significant upsides. There is a tendency to sometimes see this as a necessary burden that you need to report this. But we see companies starting to look at this with a whole new lens, to be honest. You see companies like AB Volvo talking about that this could be the opportunity of a lifetime. That company, for example, sees a revenue, if you look on the left side on this slide, so they see a revenue upside of 50% on a product lifetime perspective, only by moving to electric equipment or electric products and increasing the service levels while doing so. But if you take a step further and actually move from being a product selling company to more, which is called a product as a service selling company, which is also in the line of many companies here in the strategies of many companies, you could, of course, increase the revenue even more while reducing emissions significantly. And you will not do this transition without accelerating the transition to new tech, data and IT solutions. So we work with quite a lot of companies that want to move in this service direction, add more services to the current kind of portfolio of products and services. And there, of course, data becomes super critical because these services are typically based on data. And then another interesting fact that I'm not sure that you're familiar with is that we can actually estimate the expected shareholder value impact out of improved ESG performance. So that has been somewhat of the holy grail for some of the CFOs out there when they look on this field and say, like, can I actually create some value out of this? And this we can now say that, yes, you typically can, and we can go in different sectors and see. And it's typically a very interesting upside there. And there are models where you can understand a little bit the impact of the E, the S, and the G. And that is also quite interesting to have more of a value approach into this topic, so you don't just report. So if we move down to the next slide, this is just what I believe is a very positive example where you see a little bit the same type of carbon profile as we saw in the previous slide, with very little emissions in scope 1 and 2. And a big chunk in scope 3, especially in the downstream product use category. And this is another Nordic manufacturing company selling like chainsaws and lawn movers and so on, using a lot of fossil fuels. So it's natural that they have a big chunk of emissions in the product use phase. But this is not so often that you see this, but it's great to see that this company actually managed to reduce their total emissions with 30% from 2015 until 2020 by electrifying a big part of their product portfolio. So that also tells a little bit about where you have the big impact. So if you can start to electrify your product portfolio, and then the next lever is really moving over to more service models, you can really have a huge impact. So I think that's very positive to see companies moving in that direction. If we move to the next slide. Okay, so why is this important for IT, and what has been the focus of ESG data and IT for the past 20 years? So a little bit, as I mentioned in the beginning, we see like the same way that corporate sustainability has been somewhat of a specialist function, a bit on the side in the business the last 20 years. The same things goes for the traditional ESG software that has been out there. So it has been very much kind of specialist point solutions. And what needs to happen now? We see more and more clients moving away from these specialist point solutions to more kind of enterprise-wide sustainability platforms. We will go into a little bit more what that is later in the presentation, but there is where we see a big movement and a big need to move. It has also been, in many cases, a tendency to focus on pure reporting of these numbers. But we also see a huge need in stepping up when it comes to getting analytics and insights and so on for different user groups as well in the organization to really act on these numbers and take action. So if we move to the next slide. So from a data and IT perspective, and given the current kind of maturity of the ESG software market, we see sustainability as a major data challenge right now. And this is often what you see out in the organizations, that data is often collected manually from a large, what can I say, from a number of different processes and areas. And it's not, I mean, there is a lot of Excel sheets out there that are used for the annual sustainability report, for example. And talking about that, it's also, we also see a huge need when it comes to not only having data for reporting, but also for kind of performance management and analytics and so on. And then there is a totally different need for frequency of data. So, I mean, companies may have been able to work like this for the last 20 years, that you have a lot of manual data, but if you're only doing it once per year for the sustainability report, you can kind of put together a project and get all the data needed and so on. But that will not be, I mean, sufficient anymore, not for the new regulatory requirements coming in, but nor to be able to actually improve the performance in this area. So that is also one big takeaway here. And what we see also a little bit, it's not one kind of ESG IT solution that will solve all this. It's more one enterprise platform using data from a large set of systems that is the answer here. And then in this field, there is typically currently a challenge with getting high quality data. And I think that is also due to the fact that this has not had the same focus as financial data for many years, but the requirements on that is increasing more and more. So if we move to the next slide. And this is a little bit taking a step back and looking into the regulatory requirements. So it's a very, to be honest, it's a very positive pressure that comes from the European Green Deal right now. And we can see that that has effect in the market, and more companies are stepping up now. And with CSRD, for example, there will be a requirement to also report on Scope 3 data. Given the numbers we saw before, we think that is very positive, because it will become very transparent, it will become very transparent how different companies perform. And I mean, right now, many companies struggle to just get the data in place, and only that is a big challenge. I have worked with Scope 3 data capture, and we have down here. It's very difficult, and there are not that many out-of-the-box solutions. So many times that actually require quite some innovativeness and collaboration with different companies and so on. But there are movements ongoing, and there are more and more standards and more software support to do this. But this is just to say that regulatory requirements will step in to actually force data quality to become better. And that is actually a very positive movement. If we move to the next slide. So this is just one way of looking on how you can kind of advance your ESG data and IT journey, a little bit depending on your starting place. So we talk with organizations that it's not everybody that has this legacy kind of ESG softwares installed already. If you're in that situation, I mean, a good starting point could be to select one of the ESG softwares out there, but probably one of the more modern ones where they start to take more and more of this enterprise platform perspective. A lot of the companies that we work with are more in the kind of second or third category here, that you start to want to embed sustainability data and insights across the enterprise. It's the data-driven sustainability category is not really there yet, but of course that's an aim to come to that situation. If we move ahead to the next slide. Okay, so some of the critical success factors that we see as crucial out there is to succeed with your ESG data platform is to have a solid ESG data governance in place. It is typically, I mean, the availability of data is crucial for everything, and the quality of that data is crucial for everything that you're going to do. This is super important, and it's important to get that going. You really need to have management backing from the top, I would say, and prioritizing this. You also need a solid ESG data model. And there are tools available and being built and built out for Scope 3 emissions right now as well that can be accelerating that journey as well. And then when it comes to the ESG reporting, it's very important to take a kind of strategic perspective into this. And we see more and more in the, for example, in the CSRD projects that we do, that's starting with a solid, what is called a double materiality assessment, which is really assessing what is big, what is small, what is most important for our company. That is also super important when you drill down later and understand, what data points and, what functions in my organizations are most important to focus on. If we move to the next slide. Okay, I look at the watch as well and see that the time is running, and I will not go through this in super detail, but this is just one view of the high-level architecture of one of the data management solutions we established for one of our clients. And to the left, you see the number of systems in place to really get this going. And the data governance, of course, is crucial. And as all data governance exercises, don't underestimate the change effort to really get that going. And then having a solid quantitative data pipeline and one single source of the truth is crucial as well to serve different use cases with the data needed. And I mean, there is a lot of talk about reporting these days due to the regulatory requirements coming, but I want to stress the need to also have the performance management system up and running in the business. Super important to also steer and improve performance. Okay, so if we move to the next slide, I will only talk very briefly about this, but there is a tendency, and we are also working on projects where you want to move away from spend-based Scope 3 calculations to more and more activity-based calculations. And that is typically where you need to work with a lot of different data sources. And it's a new area to attack, very interesting area, but you shouldn't underestimate the effort to get that going. If we move to the next slide, this is This is just one example of scope 3 category 4 upstream. So this is a transport example for a client that we did. And here you can see a little bit, and this is also a little bit back to one take on sustainability as a whole, that there are a lot of, capabilities and systems out there that you can use, that you already have in place, that you just need to tweak and add and so on. So you see, they had the SAP as an enterprise ERP system here. So we used a lot of purchase order data to track this, combined with the various sources of information like road distances, weight, and of course the recurring emission factor component that you always need in this type of emission calculations. And the key takeaways here was that the data is rather complex, and it comes from a lot of different sources, but it's actually very doable to do this. This didn't take so long time actually, and they also managed to build what many seek for, a forecasting model. So not only able to look at historic data, but also to forecast expected emissions development over the years. So this was a pretty interesting project in that space. And if we move down, I think we can just move down 2 slides. I think we can go into the last slide already. So the 3 key takeaways is really to, when you look at data and IT to enable decarbonization, take a step back and understand what is big and small. And typically there is a big need for scope 3 enablement and acceleration. And looking at the bigger picture, this will require us to change our products and services quite significantly. And I think that Torbjörn as well, PTC software is very crucial to talking about existing software that is already out there, to use that to optimize products from an emissions standpoint and services. And then, of course, data and IT will be crucial to enable this journey. So a bit over time, sorry for that. It's a wide topic, but I think it's important to try to give the holistic picture here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you, Anders, for sharing a lot of interesting insights about this really hot topic. So over to the Q&A. Any questions you might have, just raise them and see where we are. I think we have at least 1 or 2 minutes. We can have some questions here. Otherwise, I will kick off actually. Could you please share a success story for a company that has used digital solutions to equip their organization with sustainability data, not only to report but also to sort of improve the sustainability in performance in the organization?
Yeah, I was engaged in one project back in 2020, for example, where the whole purpose was to bring data from all these systems that you saw in the other slides and from some of the specialist systems out to all the people in the organization. And back then, there weren't really any out-of-the-shelf softwares that could be used. So, and this was a very kind of digital organization focusing on building a lot of stuff on their own. But we actually developed a product there that where we worked a lot with, data scientists and data analysts to really bring the most important insights to different user groups in the organization in a user-friendly way. So that was very appreciated and quite successful. And as soon as you have the data and you have a team in place, and now you also have a lot of softwares that can be used for this, this can be very effective, and also to visualize for different user groups what is big, what is small, and then you can work with a lot of different functionalities like what if simulators, and you can add different things to get those that going.
Thank you. I think we have a last question here. And what did you actually learn from that experience with them in regards to getting other operating models such as people governance, annual goals, settings, and budgeting process to this journey, sort of?
Yeah, I think that became pretty evident because in this project we worked from a digital data perspective to develop this product for this organization, and it's like, yeah, as soon as you have the digital product in place, you start to see the need for different functions stepping in and actually taking ownership of, for example, the goal setting process. So what goals should the sales organization have for selling sustainable products, for example? And that may also be a pretty big exercise to get all the different functions and people and governance and processes in place. So it's not the key takeaway there is that it's not as always, it's not sufficient with a tool. You also need to look at, the people, process, governance perspectives out of this to have real impact and to feed, this digital tools with what is needed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think maybe we should take one last question, actually. I think we got one really interesting one. Will a business naturally invest in any ESG software, or is it the experience so far that they will do their own thing?
Sorry, once again?
Will a business naturally invest in an ESG software, or is it the experience that you have so far that they will do their own thing? That's the question I had in the chat here.
Yeah, and I think we see a little bit a mix of those. There is, unfortunately, we see quite a lot of companies moving out and just want to buy one piece of software to solve all this, and that may be a bit difficult sometimes. But yeah, we see quite a mix of this, but a movement towards more of the kind of major enterprise platform players, like you have Microsoft and IBM, and some of the big players are getting more and more traction out there.
Yeah. Thanks, Anders. And time is unfortunately running out. So thanks everyone for joining. And of course, a special thanks to you, Anders, for sharing all this information here. So with that, I hope to see you back already next week for another session on PTC Talks on circular digitalization, transforming with Pullpack, Rockwell and Automation, PTC success story. So with that, I hope you will have a fantastic weekend, everyone. Bye-bye so far.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
See you.